Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the State of the Arc podcast. My name is Mike.
My name's Kason.
We got some great topics today. Let's jump first into our stories of the week. There were two in particular. It's actually been 2 weeks since our last podcast, but really only two things stood out to me. First and foremost, the Alliance Live. Ooh, I didn't add Kason to this one. Hold on. 1 second.
Where did I go? I
Cason's
promise
gotta
I'm
be
here.
in here. There he is. Let me put him into the right place. Sorry, everybody. I'll get it figured out 1 second. There he is. He's in place. Okay. Now we can continue. You're not centered, though. That's going to bother me. There we go.
Okay. We're
right.
good.
The Alliance Alive. This is a game that I did a video on back around the time that it was going to be released. I think I released the video the day before it came out, but it was kind of like a first look, not necessarily a review, but just my thoughts on the demo. And I really liked it. Like the demo that I played, I would say like the first 10 to 15 hours of the game I thought were really, really exceptional. I didn't end up finishing it just because of how busy I am and stuff like that. It's kind of a long game, but it does a lot of stuff really, really well. In particular, I love its overworld exploration. The way that it does overworlds, like one of the best I've ever seen in any JRPG. It's a really, really cool game. You guys should look into it if you have not heard about it. But before, it was a 3DS exclusive game, and now it's being remastered for the PlayStation 4, the Switch, and PC, and is going to be released later this year. If you guys, don't know too much about it, the writer of Suikoden 1 and 2 wrote the story for this game. Writer-director of Suikoden 1 and 2, I should say, wrote the story for the Alliance Alive, and Hamauzu, who is the composer for Final Fantasy 13, World of Final Fantasy, a lot of other Final Fantasy projects. He is the composer of the music for this game, and the music's actually really excellent in the Alliance Alive. So I'm going to go ahead and just play the trailer here. Yeah, so you guys can kind of get a look and feel for it. But anyways, it's a really unique RPG. I felt like, when I played it, I play a lot of JRPGs, especially covering, stuff for this channel. Uh-huh. And this one of all the games that came out last year is one that stood out as feeling unique to me. It has kind of an interesting level progression system for the characters. It was a little difficult to figure out exactly how it works. It can feel a bit random, how you unlock new abilities and things like that. But as always, players pool together. They eventually figure it out. There are guides to it now, so you can kind of know what's going on. But anyways, I liked that game. I do plan on finishing it. I will probably wait for this remastered edition to come out and maybe start a new file. Possibly cover it more on the channel later this year, but just be aware of that. If you didn't have a 3DS when I was talking about this, but you have a Switch or a PlayStation 4, or you game on the PC, you'll have a chance to try it out now. So it looks awesome. Also, this was sent to me on Discord. This is a game called Towers. I don't know much about it other than this trailer, but it looks freaking sweet. So I'm just going to play it. It says the following video shows a work in progress. It contains clips from a game produced by a core indie team of 6 developers over the course of 12 months. Actually, Kason, I should send this to you.
I found one. I just looked one up on IGN.
Towers official game trailer or whatever.
Oh no, I'm looking at Towers prototype trailer. Okay, show me.
Maybe that is the same thing. Hold on, let me give it to you just in case.
Maybe it's like
it probably is
4 minutes long. Okay.
Yeah, exactly, like 4 minutes long. That's probably the same one.
Yeah, it's the same one.
So the fact that this was made by a core of 6 people is insane to me. Um,
Wow.
Graphically, it is one of the most impressive things I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And the world seems very imaginative. I mean, really interesting monster designs. The landscapes are really beautiful,
Yeah.
and the characters give me somewhat of like a Studio Ghibli vibe. They wear these masks.
Oh yeah.
They're kind of tribalistic. He's got like a little glider, kind of like
Breath of the
Breath
Wild.
of the Wild.
Yeah.
And it seems to have a really heavy like online multiplayer focus where there's like
Ah.
co-op going on. So there's other players there. And big giant monsters that
Like
are kind
Monster
of
Hunter. This is like a
yeah.
mix of a bunch of the games that I really like.
I know. It looks awesome.
Yeah.
The music in the trailer is also very good. I'm not playing the music now. I've got it on mute, but the music to me was very impressive too. So just about on every front that I can see from this trailer, this is looking like it could be a really magnificent title. Of course, this is just a prototype they're showing. They still have a long way to go in development, I would think, but something to keep your eye on for sure. Yeah, we'll continue to update you guys on this as more information comes up, but this is something that I'm going to be following.
Yeah, this looks really cool. Holy cow.
It looks really good. So, towers.
There's like some Final Fantasy 15 here. There's like
Yep.
so much there. Like Avatar, the James Cameron's Avatar.
Mm-hmm.
There's like a lot of really cool stuff all thrown together here. Super impressive.
It is very, very, very impressive game.
Yeah.
It looks
Holy
awesome.
cow.
So, anyways, that is that for the stories of the week. Let's get to our main topic today, which is what makes a good villain. This is something that we were touching on a little bit. We were kind of skirting with this a bit on our last podcast and said we'd get to it a little bit later. And I've thought about it for the last little while, and my thoughts on this are probably not going to be super long, which is okay. Short podcast once in a while. But what we were talking about specifically last time was kind of like the difference between an archetypal villain that is meant to stand as some kind of metaphor for fear or evil or just some kind of concept or metaphysical idea or something like that, versus a villain that's meant to be taken more literally as a human being.
That's like a human. Yeah, exactly.
So there's no like one right way to do this, obviously. There's a lot of different ways, a lot of different portrayals that can be very effective within whatever story you're creating. But as I've thought about it, I've kind of boiled it down, I think, to two approaches that I see being really effective in their own right. And one is I'll just call it, because I don't know if there are legit storytelling terms for this or not, but I'll just create my own if there aren't. You have the sympathetic villain, right? The villain that you're meant to go, that guy has a point.
Right.
You're not meant to feel like they're totally evil. They make you think a little bit deeper about your binary thinking, a little bit deeper about your own sense of morality. Is this really right or wrong? And in the end, you kind of go, like maybe I don't support the means, but I don't necessarily disagree with the premise of the dude's motivation or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. Then you have just the menacing villain, the villain that is meant to make you feel afraid in whenever that person comes on screen. It's like, oh crap. This is not good. Oh crap. The heroes are in danger. Yeah. Get out of there. Holy crap. And it just creates a sense of fear and intimidation. And both can be extremely effective, like I said, depending on the story that you're telling. I would say for genres where it's supposed to be, well, let's say a horror, for example, right? Like in a horror movie, like you want that villain to be like intensely menacing and intimidating, and very you want to be very afraid of that villain when it comes around, right?
Yeah.
But in other genres or in another type of story, that wouldn't necessarily be the most effective choice. So, a few things, a few. Well, before we get into that, I guess let me pass it to you. Like, what are your thoughts on any of that?
No, I think that's good. There's kind of the two, but I think there's also sort of like a third villain that would be the kind of villain that is almost like an accidental villain, like didn't really mean to be a villain, but like a kid who gets bullied. Actually, I have some pretty good examples of this one, like Gollum in Lord of the Rings, or Skull Kid from Majora's Mask. Like a character that doesn't, like, their philosophy is, I don't know, they became a villain almost by accident. Like they were, they were kind of rejected by their community, and then they came across by chance, some incredibly powerful thing that allowed them to kind of take revenge or, become a little bit of a villain without really having a philosophy, without being the super scary or the philosophically, I'm doing this for a purpose, but just kind of like, just by pure accident, they just became something by pure human nature. Also, they just kind of found some power and they just became consumed by it. And I think Gollum and Skull Kid are probably pretty good examples of that.
Skull Kid is a really good villain. I didn't actually think about that this week, but that's a good one to bring up.
It's not until the end. I mean, spoilers, I guess. This game's about 20 years old, but spoiler alert about Majora's Mask if you haven't played it. Let's wait a second. At the end, you find out he was kind of he was a bullied kid, and he just happened to come across this really powerful thing, and he ended up using it. He causes mischief. He's not like an actual villain. He's just a kid trying to have fun, and like a kid playing with a bunch of ants, and he's trying to pick them up, and he accidentally kills a bunch, and like, well, whatever. And that's what Skull Kid is, basically. He's not like a real villain any more than a toddler terrorizing ants is a villain, so just kind of a thought there.
Yeah, I love Majora's Mask. I will cover that game at some point on this channel. Game's amazing. But
I think the accidental villain, though, it's not very common. I remember when I was a kid, I watched, was it like Ghost? But no, it was Honey, I Blew Up the Kid. That's what it was. Honey, I Blew Up the Kid, the sequel, where this huge toddler starts running around New York City, and he's just like breaking everything. And it was like so scary, but it's a kid. And finally his mom comes out and is like talking to him, and he was playing with the toy cars, which are real cars, but he's huge. And he just didn't get what was happening. And he was a villain, but he wasn't really a villain. He's just a little misunderstood kid. And finally his mom talks to him and he cries. In Toy Story 3, there's a character like that too. They call him Big Baby. He's the enforcer for the purple bear, Lotso. And anyways, by the end, you figure out he's just a kid. He just happens to be big and strong because he's just big. But he's just like a little kid. He didn't mean to be a villain or anything. But those villains, I find, it's like philosophically, they're just not relevant. Archetypally, they just aren't. They're not there. They aren't super like a human type of character, but they're also not like a deep philosophical like the Joker. But they're not, Darth Vader. Well, Darth Vader, we found out more about him later. What would be a good Voldemort? They're not like Lord Voldemort, but
they're just purely evil.
Yeah, but they're there, and that's something to kind of point out, I guess.
Let's catch up with some comments here. Mr. Slyke says, I'm really interested on what they felt about Suikoden 2 with Luca Blight. So I'm still kind of in the middle of my playthrough of Suikoden 2. I've now finally gotten past the point where I left off in my first playthrough years ago. And Luca Blight so far is a very effective villain. As just a completely chaotic evil type that's meant to be menacing. I would class him in the second of the two types. Kaysen's kind of created a third with the accidental one. which I do agree with. Those can be really interesting too. So if we have the sympathetic, the menacing, and the accidental, Luca would definitely fit into the menacing, where he's pretty much just entirely evil. He wants to create as much chaos and suffering and torment and agony as he can. He relishes in it. He's a sadist. And that can be really unsettling and very effective when done the right way. And in the scenes in which he's appeared so far in my playthrough of Suikoden 2, I would say he's one of the better ones I've seen on that front. So I like Luca Blight a lot as a villain. Lego Dog says, I think Shin Megami Tensei has some of my favorite approaches to villains in the series, since they're all force of nature. But who is a villain is determined by your alignment, since the lines are not drawn by good and evil, but by the ideals and laws of chaos. Shin Megami Tensei seems like a really interesting series. It's one that I would like to play more. I've dabbled with the third game and the fourth game. Probably played about 10 hours of each one. So I wish I knew more about it. I wish I could include it in the conversation, but I'm too ignorant on Shin Megami Tensei. But that sounds very interesting.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Velhart says the power of Majora is that it gives power and has the user unleash their negative emotions. Later learned that Majora itself has its own thing, if not attached to a user. Good thing to bring up. The mask itself contains like
that would be the evil.
Yeah, that's the evil part. Skull Kid is the victim of it,
and that's
right?
true of also like with Lord of the Rings, Gollum. It's the ring. Mm-hmm. That's the real evil thing, which is tied to Sauron. It's not really Gollum, but he still is. I would consider him a villain. But.
Okay, so I think that let's move here next. Whether or not you're going to choose a villain within one of those three categories, right? Whether or not you're going to move this direction with it or that direction with it, there are, I think, a couple of key points that are important for the villain to be effective, almost no matter what you choose. And I think the first thing is typically you want the villain to be more powerful than the hero, especially at the beginning of the story. You've probably heard the phrase, the hero is only as good as the villain before.
Sure.
And I would say that's almost always true. Like, the hero is only awesome, the hero is only great as long as the counterpart is really, really powerful, really menacing, a great challenge to overcome. If the villain is weak, if the villain isn't very intimidating, or if the hero is always more powerful than the villain, then typically the hero doesn't seem to resonate quite as well, because I think what people want to see when they're enjoying a story is a character that overcomes great challenges, really, really difficult trials, passes through a lot of trouble and suffering, and overcomes that. That's what we like to see. We like to see them go to like the absolute bottom and then climb back out of that and overcome all of the challenges they face. So the greater the challenge that is presented by the villain, usually the more that we will appreciate the struggles of the hero.
You know what's kind of funny? There's some level of that in real life as well.
Oh, yeah.
Like when you look at like being from the United States, when you look back at the greatest presidents, right? They aren't just the greatest just because they were so great. They're the greatest because they faced the greatest challenges, right? Like Abraham Lincoln or George Washington. You look back and it's like, had they been president at any other time, we would just totally overlook them, right? It's the fact that they were, the president of this time, this great challenge that they had to surmount, or this great, war that they had to fight, or something like that, that makes them these great heroes in the past, but that aren't really, probably any like super different from other people. But that's just the way that the story unfolds. That's the way we look at them.
Velhart says, I agree. On top of that, the villain doesn't have to be physically more powerful. I think of Superman and Lex Luthor. Superman could easily go kill him and call it a day, but Lex knows how Superman works and knows how to use it against him.
Well, that's interesting. That's a good point.
That's the next point I was going to bring up, is that it does not necessarily have to relate to being physically able to kill or overcome or whatever.
Right.
The villain just needs to have an advantage of some kind over the hero makes the hero have to overcome a lot of challenges, right?
This kind of reminds me of the movie Unbreakable.
Yes.
Samuel Jackson is just like this broken dude. He's the villain, but he can't do anything in and of himself. He's so like weak, but he's really smart. And in some other ways, he's able to kind of have advantage over the hero for a little while.
I'll get into this a little bit more. But two of my favorite villains of all time are Hans Landa from Inglourious Basterds.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh, that guy. Oof.
And Shigur from No Country for Old Men.
Yep.
And in both cases, neither of them are in the typical sense. Like these powerful physical specimens that just like overpower everyone they come across. It's not about that. In Hans Landa's case, it's about position. It's about his level of authority as a Nazi officer. And you almost never know what that character knows.
And he's got the best poker face.
I'll get into that in a minute too.
Well, Shigur also, like, he's just blank-faced half the time, and you know what he's capable of, but you don't know what he's thinking.
You have no idea what he's thinking, right?
Yeah.
We'll get into that in a minute, but that's another level of advantage, right? When you're in a situation and you do not know what your enemy is thinking, you don't know what they're going to do, you're at a disadvantage, especially if they know what you're thinking and what you're going to do. You feel very, very weak and exposed and vulnerable. And so when a villain is a step ahead of you, even having that level of an advantage and just feeling like this guy is just smarter than me, he knows more than me, he's got a plan, he's trapping me, like even just that kind of level of advantage can make the villain much more intimidating and make the hero's obstacles seem that much greater, right? So that's the first principle. Making the villain more powerful than the hero is really important. I'd say it's probably the most important of anything you can do. The next one is motivation, and making that motivation personal for the villain, right? So you can have... I'll use Middle-earth as two examples for this, right? In The Lord of the Rings, we have really no insight whatsoever into Sauron's personal motivation.
Right.
It is entirely off-screen. We see none of it. We never even, he has no lines of dialogue or anything like that. We only really see him in, one scene, I think. Well, there's...
the prelude, or the pre...
We see him, in physical form in the pre... What is that? Yeah,
what's the word?
The sequence that happens before the prologue.
The prologue, that's the word. Yeah.
So we see him in physical form there, but then only really the Eye of Sauron whenever Frodo puts on the ring, or in the Palantir you see it too. When Sauron's talking to him. I guess he does have a line. Build me an army worthy of Mordor.
Build me an army. Oh, that's right.
That's his one line.
Yep.
Anyways, my point is that we don't have any insight whatsoever into that character. And for that reason, I think I would admit, though I love Lord of the Rings, that he's not the greatest villain ever. I would say that in Lord of the Rings, the threat is more like nature. It's more like overcoming the fact that they've got to climb over this mountain or go through this dark cave. And of course there are the armies and the orcs and balrogs and monsters that they come across along the way, like all of that. But it feels more like a man versus nature type of thing, because really it's about the internal struggle of Frodo to resist the ring, of the other characters to resist that temptation. It's more of them fighting against their own desires to use the ring than it is about fighting against Sauron as a villain, as a character. And I'll get more into man versus nature in a minute, because there was somebody last week who asked about that. But Sauron is not a very interesting villain, I would say, for that reason, because there doesn't seem to be a relatable motivation, because Sauron is a Maiar, he's a higher being. However, in the Silmarillion, which we're reading right now in book club, I think he did a much better job at humanizing, so to speak, Melkor / Morgoth, who gets lots more screen time, lots more opportunity to sort of relay his personal feelings and why he's humiliated and why he seeks revenge and what he wanted in the beginning and was denied. And the motivation is much clearer on Melkor's part. And to me makes him a far more interesting villain than Sauron ever was. As just a guy who followed... there was a really good line in the Silmarillion that says, Sauron was only less evil than Melkor in that for a time he served another and not himself. Or something like that, right? Like,
nice. That's pretty good.
That's basically the only insight into Sauron we ever get, is that the dude's just really evil, okay? And, like, I love that line. I think that line is really poignant, profound, really well written. But, like... I don't know, like that's really all there is to him. Whereas Melkor, he was denied by Varda before the music. He was jealous envious of the secret fire within Iluvatar, wanted to be able to create beings with free will, but was denied that, was jealous of the other Valar and the things that they were making, and just kind of devolved from a being with like the greatest potential and the greatest power of anyone beyond, except for Iluvatar, into this just degenerate, like, who set all the power out of himself into his armies, into everything surrounding him, and weakened himself to the point where he just hid in, his dungeon, or in his fortress, and could barely really like do anything, and lived with the pain of the burning of the Silmarils in his hand and the weight of that on him, and he basically just like he lost all of his power pretty much in the attempt to destroy. So I really liked him a lot more because you get a lot more of that personal motivation. I was going to avoid talking about The Dark Knight because anytime that you like look at discussions, because I was doing this throughout the week, looking at discussions about villains online, everyone brings it back to The Dark Knight's Joker. And I was like, I wanted to try and avoid it, but there are some good points to be made with it. And I guess he's talked about that much for a reason. So, but that villain, as well as John Doe from Seven. Have you seen Seven, Casey?
Oh, the Seven. He's committing all the sins. Yeah, I know that.
Yeah, so
I've seen that. It's been a while.
that villain and the Joker, I think, have kind of like a similar archetype, if you want to call it that, I guess, where their motivation is just to prove to the world that their ideology is correct, that they're going to prove that what they believe is right, and that they're going to create all this chaos and all these heinous acts, but the point of it is not to destroy the city or to or humanity or anything like that, but more or less to prove a point about humanity.
Right.
It's like, you see, everyone's just as ugly on the inside as I say they are, and so the Joker. There's the famous line from the movie where he says, "Some men just want to watch the world burn,"
right?
And a lot of people associate that as the Joker's just crazy. He just wants to destroy everything, watch it all go down. But I don't think that that's necessarily true of the character. What he really wants is to prove that when pushed over the brink, when really put under stress, the natural human tendency is going to be selfish, destructive. They will eat each other, I think he says, or something like that. And so his entire plot is set up to like create a scenario where the people will turn on each other and they will sink into chaos, and they see that everyone's really just as bad as I am on the inside. They just need to be pushed a little bit, and like this facade of civilization will crumble. And that is the thematic opposite of Bruce Wayne or Batman's ideology, right? Which is that it's a strict like sense of law and order, and that people are inherently good, and that they. So that's the third point, right? So we have a personal motivation for the villain, and then we want to see them taking the thematically opposite either ideology or moral position from the hero.
So then it becomes like a battle of the ideologies themselves, as opposed to just who's stronger, this guy or that guy.
Yeah, exactly. And so you work a theme and a message into your story, and your characters are working to sort of like describe or lay out the argument for the theme that you're presenting. And they're going to battle against each other, not just, fighting, but they're also with what they believe is right or whatever. Let's see. I haven't been reading.
I can read a couple.
Are there any
So Riker's Beard says, I think great villains all do the same thing. They invoke emotional responses in the reader. If that villain can't offend the morality of the reader just a little bit, then the reader isn't going to care much one way or the other about them. Bonus points if the villain has a stance that may be rationally correct, but morally unjust. I think it's a very good good thought right there. Lego Dog says, well, you could see Sauron as an analogy for the nature of evil itself.
That's true.
It's entirely possible. Velhart says, I remember playing Quantum Break in what made me upset with the game, besides the fact it has Netflix episodes in between, is not only did they let you choose what the protagonist does, but it also lets you choose what the antagonist does. It takes away from the drama or consequences of my actions. Very interesting.
That is interesting. That's kind of a strange choice.
Remember, Tolkien was Catholic, and a lot of it shows in writing. That's true. He does take a lot of archetypal stuff in his writings. Chris Senna is new
his book
here.
is biblical.
It's biblical.
The Silmarillion is biblical, dude.
Velhart, I never watched 7 again after the gluttony scene. Okay.
That is a crazy scene. Yeah.
Lego Dog says the line I love in Dark Knight is when he speaks to Batman and says, "This is what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object."
Yeah.
That's like the theory of an atomic bomb, basically, of, splitting an atom. Like atoms can't be split, but what if you put something that can't be stopped and it hits something that can't be split? Well, freaking blows everything up. I feel like we will be doing this forever. And then Joker takes an amoral, nihilistic approach to philosophy. That is absolutely true.
Yeah, so in 7, I guess, spoilers, I'll be really quick about it. And they're not intense spoilers, but I mean, it kind of is. So give me a minute or whatever and then come back. So go away if you haven't seen it. Go watch it, though. It's a great movie.
Yeah, it's good. It's older. It's good, though.
So, the entire idea was taking the 7 deadly sins, finding an example of each, and this guy tortures and kills these people. But the whole point is to sort of like get these cops to capture him so he can like put his final killing on display with one of the cops. One of the cops represents, I think it's, what are they? Greed,
envy,
gluttony,
lust.
Greed,
gluttony.
I just need a list in front of me.
I'm remembering the characters in Full Metal Alchemist.
Sins.
The homunculi in Full Metal Alchemist, they all represent one of
lust, gluttony, greed, sloth, wrath, envy, and pride. So wrath. Wrath is the final one that he wants to that he wants to like put on display with one of the main cops. Anyways, the way that it's all pulled together, and this is, I think, another interesting point for both Seven and The Dark Knight, is that the villain wins in both cases. Like, you think about the end of The Dark Knight, it doesn't feel like totally tragic at the end. It's like, oh, but the entire system is sustained on a lie. That's the only way that they can like maintain order in the city. So Joker was essentially right.
Joker was right in two ways, though. There was that, but also Joker was right. He got Batman to break his one rule.
Yep.
Batman's rule: he never kills anybody. And like, even though it was to save someone else, he got Batman to kill him, basically.
And they took Harvey Dent and transformed him into a villain. You know, like this was like the paragon, the symbol of like actual justice and good.
And he became,
So the Joker basically won the entire
He did
film.
everything except for the boats blowing up. He did everything
only
he wanted to.
That was the only thing where he didn't quite get it to go the way he wanted. But ultimately, the system would have completely fallen apart had they known what really happened with Harvey Dent.
Yep.
And anyways, so having your villain win can be really effective too. And in 7, the villain wins. So it's especially when you're having like the first type of villain that I was talking about, the one that's sympathetic, the one that you go, you know, that guy might have a point, where you understand deeply their personal motivation, their ideology, their thoughts, their reason for doing what they're doing. If you can have them win, even if even like, you know, the Joker is captured, put in prison, whatever, so they don't win in the sense that they get everything they wanted, but they win in just the overall sense. Their ideas win in the end. That can make your audience really think about the theme and can be a really effective tool. That villain can be a really effective tool in delivering the message of the story. So those would be some of the guiding principles that I would put behind writing a villain of that type, a villain that is meant to be a little bit more sympathetic. I haven't seen the last Avengers movie, but Thanos is one that's, from what I've heard, is supposed to fit into this type.
It's kind of weird, though, because they spent the first few Avengers making him not that. And then that was basically people's complaint, was like, oh, the villains are all basic villains. How come that none of them are very deep? I'm like, okay, so then Thanos becomes this deep villain, but it's like kind of
but it's the same thing. It's like, you understand the villain's ideas. You go, you know, he has a point, though I don't like the way he's trying to make it happen.
Right.
And he wins. So, like, that can be really effective. And we have 3 examples of that right here. And all 3 of these are considered some of the best villains ever created in film. The Joker from The Dark Knight, John Doe from 7, and Thanos from The Avengers. And all 3 of them follow that kind of formula. So you want to create an effective villain that people can relate to, that people can understand, but still oppose, still understand that they're wrong. That's a good way to go about it. Now, the reason I think that resonates with a lot of people is because it's more true to real life. Real life villains rarely think of themselves as evil.
No.
They can have a really twisted sense of logic that is based on truth, and that's what's so uncomfortable about it. I think, again, we tend to want to be binary in the way that we think. That's just natural. We want to separate things into categories.
Yeah. It's kind of how societies can function. Is by people agreeing on what the categories are and do this, don't do this. It's pretty binary.
Life is a lot easier when you can quickly and easily identify things and place them categorically in your mind into, is this thing dangerous or not? Is this thing something I should pursue or not? And it's just but one, yes or no, 0, 1. Like
it's like a computer. Like, it's binary.
Good, bad. Like, should I do? Should I not do? It just makes life easier when your brain can just register your response as quickly as possible. And binary thinking is the way to categorize that. So things become really uncomfortable when you are forced to take something out of the category or box you've placed it in and go, well, where should I put it? It doesn't belong here or here. So what do I do with this? Yeah. And all of a sudden you really have to start like racing and thinking about that and going, wait, my whole like system of thinking is wrong on this, right? And this happens a lot. I've seen with social commentary and political commentary, when people are talking about real world events, horrible things that happen, you see a lot of people racing to categorize what happened by following the categories they've set up underneath their ideology and saying, this belongs in this box. See, here's why, blah, 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 blah. Right. And then this, the other side will say, it doesn't belong in this box. It belongs in this box. And this is why. And they only follow the evidence that supports their category, their ideology, their way of thinking about it. And they discard the things that make it more uncomfortable to think about. And I've seen this a lot recently. I mean, it's gotten to a point where I have a hard time watching anyone talk about politics because I see that process happening in the minds of people. I see them choosing willfully to not look at certain things and only focus on other things that support their ideology so that they can categorize and easily sort of like make their choices on what they feel about things rather than really examining something which is much more uncomfortable and much more difficult.
It takes a critical approach and it's uncomfortable.
Like when you see, I don't know, like just a horrible event, whether it's a terrorist act or something like that. And we come to understand in the investigation what the morals of the person were, why they were driven to do what they did, what the motivations were. And you start looking at what they're saying and you go, that's not actually incorrect. Like, the person's reason for being mad is not totally wrong. Like, they have a point that they are making. But somewhere, their rage completely, and possibly mental illness, in a lot of cases, mental illness, twists their logic in such a way to where they arrive at a conclusion of how to resolve the problem that is just so off base and just so wildly wrong. But you can't just pass it off and not look at the problem that created the person's anger in the first place. And those are problems that need to be addressed. And often, I think too often, we pass over those issues because they're uncomfortable and say, nope, categorize as on or off, binary, wrong or right, good or evil. That's easier. And so we completely dismiss, I think, a lot of the underlying issues that create problems like this. And we don't address them because we're too prideful in the sense that anyways, I've gone off on a total rant on this, but I think this is why these types of villains are really popular, especially right now, and why they are effective, because it does make you go like, I don't know what to do with this. I'm uncomfortable with it. And it challenges you to think about it on a different level. And it can be a more interesting story when you have a villain like that.
All right. I've got a few more.
Okay, go for it.
Comments here. So Chrisena says, in the most hardcore of archetypal stories, the evil always triumphs in the end, but with a small seed of hope growing out of the ashes, or at least as far as I can see. That's common. I mean, I think about like Harry Potter, like the end of Harry Potter, and it's like Voldemort didn't win, really, but it's a pretty hopeless situation. Basically, I don't know, a lot of stuff got destroyed, and I remember at the very end of that movie just being like, "Holy crap! Like what in the world? Like this school is just a mess now." But it's like, well, they'll rebuild now, and that's kind of how a lot of stories kind of end in a way where it's like, yeah, everything's destroyed, but let's start picking up the pieces. Let's start rebuilding now. So that's
Riker's Beard is bringing up anti-heroes.
Yeah, this is something I wanted to talk about.
What are your guys' opinions on the anti-hero trend over the last decade, where the protagonist of the story is actually the villain? The Sopranos, Breaking Bad, etc.
Right.
The kind of character that you are supposed to be you're supposed to emotionally sympathize with, but be morally disgusted by. Yeah.
Yep.
It's kind of the same thing on the reverse side. It's like it's a good way, a good exercise in breaking this binary mentality and thinking about things a little like, where do we draw the lines? Like, where should we draw the lines?
Right.
You know, you have like the hard lines of the law, right? But then you present a situation that goes like, well, if let's say two people broke the same law, but one person did it for malicious reasons and the other person did it for the survival of his family or some other reason, and it's like, well, do they have the same degree of guilt? Do we give them the same penalty because the same law was broken? Right. Or do we consider the motivation or the intent behind the act? And does that have weight as well? I mean, there's so much, and that's why gray area is so uncomfortable, because it's like it's hard to make those choices. You have to really think hard about them to get them right. And even if you think you've gotten it right, another person will have a variance of disagreement with you. And so I think that late 90s going into the 2000s, television started exploring a lot of stories like that, and it's become wildly popular because it is challenging. It makes your mind work. It's like, like I do feel for this horrible person they're presenting to me in the story. How is this? Can't be right. I don't want them to win, really, do I? Like, why do I feel this way?
Right. It's because you get to know them. This is something that happens this is something that does happen in real life as well. You see politically groups of people that are typically like not held in high esteem. I don't know exactly how to put this. Like society functions a certain way, and then society has a certain view on certain people, right? Mm-hmm. These people should this or that, right? And then somehow people within that society get to know these people. This is something that's happened with like gay people. Gay people had a hard time coming out of the closet for a long time. I still think they do, but it's becoming a little bit easier. But the idea is there was this idea among society that gay people were this certain way, and it was like, well, okay, I may have these feelings, but I'm not going to let anybody know about them. But then as gay people begin to come out, all of a sudden people start meeting gay people. People start getting their friends. They realized one of their friends for a long time was gay, and they realized that their ideas on what gay people are or were completely wrong. And now that they actually get to know somebody personally on a personal level, it's like, okay, well, maybe this whole portion of society shouldn't like these things shouldn't be illegal anymore the way that they were, or maybe certain things or certain laws need to change in order to, make way. But it's only by getting to know personally people who are different from you that you're able to kind of change your outlook on society. So in the case of like Breaking Bad or something like that, it's like all meth dealers are bad people, right? But all of a sudden we get to know one, and he was a high school chemistry teacher, and he was such a nice guy, and he was only doing this because he thought he was going to die or something. Or I'm pretty sure that's the premise. Anyways, I haven't really seen Breaking Bad. I saw the first episode though, and so he starts to sell meth so he can have some more money, and it's like, okay, well, that's not so bad, right? Like, you can do that a little bit. I mean, I don't know how much into detail they go about the people he sells meth to and how a lot of them probably overdose and die.
Sure.
But, you at least look at him and you can sympathize with him. And all of a sudden it's like, well, maybe it's not so black and white the way that I used to think.
I think you made a really great point there. And that is that the
Riker's Beard, I hate you.
But the point that you made is that like that is exactly what the solution I would say idealistically should be, is that if you have I guess, an idea. Like you have your box in which you categorize a group of people, right? Generally, it's because, and you look at them in a very negative light. Generally, it's because you don't really know them that well. You just see like certain parts of it, and you go, well, those things I've categorized my whole life in the wrong box, so it's easier for me to just place them all over there.
Right.
Whereas if you really take the time to go learn about, meet, like get to know those people directly, you start to understand the underlying reasons why these real problems are happening. And I'm not talking about gay people anymore, by the way. I'm talking about more general, on a more general sense.
Right. Gay people was like a perceived villain that was not.
There's nothing
Mike's
wrong
talking
with
about
that.
Real villains.
I'm talking about real villains, okay?
Yeah.
People who have committed heinous acts.
Yeah.
It's very hard to deal with the fact and wrestle with the fact that when you can just put evil on the face of what someone has done and just put them in the box over there and just pass it off, it's just so much easier. But when you actually look at them and you get to know them and you go like, man, that sucks. This person had potential. This person could have done great things. This person was not stupid. This person had real, legitimate fears that he allowed, or she allowed that fear to overcome them. It's like really, it's painful to see like the fact that person needed help and didn't have access to it, didn't have the right people in place to like talk them off the ledge, so to speak, to like help them in the gaps of their logic and present them with a better way. And all of a sudden, but it again, and this is especially disgusting to me, is the way that news outlets that have certain political biases will only examine the facts that support their binary ideology, and they will only report it in that way, and they won't take a close examination, and they don't even try to reach across or try to understand the underlying problems. And that's why I think, at least in my own case, villains like the ones we're talking about that have this level of thematic moral opposition to the main character, but that motivation is personal and clearly defined and has kernels of truth in its in the passion for that villain to be thinking that way, are really, really interesting, because they help us learn how to break out of this way of thinking that I think makes it easy to vilify those who are opposed to us, to pass them off as being strictly evil, and then justifies our vehemence, our what would eventually lead to violence against that group. We have to stop them. We have to. They're evil. That will lead to bad things. Whereas when you actually get to know them, when you get to meet them, when you take them out of the box and you examine everything, you go, this person's not that much different from me. We just need to talk about it. We need to compromise, right?
Yeah.
Now, I'm not trying to, again, that's an idealistic situation. There are going to be times when you can't compromise, or a person refuses to compromise. And, it's not that talking about things is going to be the answer always. Obviously, that's not true. And don't mistake me. I know that the world is not that way.
Right.
But I think we are too quick to vilify, and there's a lot more strife, a lot more problems than there needs to be, because people are unwilling to try to understand an opposing point of view. Yeah. And so things escalate and become a lot worse than they need to be because we do that. So that's why I like that type of villain.
So we've got Banana Slamma saying, I love me a well-done anti-hero, compelling from the get-go. Tony Soprano especially is great. I think it's a trend because it definitely didn't happen too often in film and TV for a large majority of its life. The anti-hero thing, I understand that. Skipping Riker's beard. Christina says, I wonder if it could have something to do with the audience getting the chance to indulge their forbidden desires. Ooh, that's very interesting. Counting on that they are in their worst moments, they wanted to be a jerk who can quip at all the stupid people in the world and be so smart they could get away with it, like Dr. House. That was an interesting show. Or getting hidden revenge on the people who wronged you, like in House of Cards. With an anti-hero, they get to identify and revel in those feelings. Oof. I think you hit on something there, but that's not something people like to think about.
Yeah, it's disturbing. It
is.
It's unsettling. It's hard to wrestle with.
In fact, and Sourdough Mouse makes a comment on that. It says, I couldn't agree more. Not to be too dramatic, but I think what you're getting at is why pictures of Hitler's softer side are so disturbing.
Oh, totally.
Because anything that makes Hitler seem like a human, like a person, we don't want to look at him as a person. We want to believe that he was something other than a person. Because if he was a person, like picture Hitler as a baby, like holy cow, that's kind of freaky. Because there's a billion babies in the world right now that you're telling me that any one of them could potentially grow up to be like that guy. And the answer is
yes.
Humans are capable of doing crazy things, and you better believe that about yourself. Otherwise, you're in trouble. You better understand your own potential to do evil so that you can check it and try to control it.
I can't remember the name of the actor. I feel really bad about it now, but dang it, I really wish I could remember. Anyways, it was something I saw a while ago. But an actor was saying he had never seen a true portrayal of Hitler in film, because the one rule that you generally should not break as an actor is that you should not judge your character.
Right.
You should not morally judge.
You've got to be in their shoes. Yeah.
You have to learn to believe in what they believed is right. And you have to learn how to see the world as they did, and that can be uncomfortable for figures like that.
Gosh. Yeah.
And we want to portray them as 100% evil, and there was nothing good about them. They were monsters. They were something other than human. That's how we want to look at them. But that isn't the reality. And so when you do learn some of, as Sourdough is saying here, the softer side of the man, it's like, that's very unsettling stuff. Anyways, let's move past the sympathetic villain and into the menacing villain, right?
Okay.
Now, this can be just as effective for different reasons. But I would say villains like Sauron were meant to be just a strictly menacing villain. When this villain comes on the screen, it's like, oh, crap. Now, in Sauron's case, I don't know that I ever truly felt that way. For me, it was much more, again, that story is much more about man versus nature, and the fact that it's man versus himself, versus the inner evil, potential for evil, like we're talking about, right? Because the ring brings that out of you. That's its power. But villains like Hans Landa from Inglourious Basterds, or Shigur from No Country for Old Men, Hannibal Lecter from Silence of the Lambs. These are villains that you don't really ever feel sympathetic for. You're not supposed to at all. They are just completely like forces of nature almost in themselves. It's just like these guys come around and it's like, oh, you feel a lot of fear. You feel a great amount of intimidation. And the one key to this, I feel, because there's almost no action in these movies that I'm talking about. Inglourious Basterds has lots and lots of talking. The tension is built up in the dialogue between the characters. The characters talk, and the scene just like builds tension that is 100 times more gripping to me than any action scene I've ever seen in my life. The opening scene of Inglourious Basterds, where Hans Landa goes to the Frenchman's house, looking for Jews that he is sheltering there and hiding. That scene is a super long opening scene. There's basically no action in it, and it is extremely intense. You are on the edge of your seat, and it's all created with dialogue. In No Country for Old Men, there's a similar scene inside of like a gas station rest stop, between the man behind the counter and Shigur. There's this scene of tension just builds up. You have no idea what's going to happen. And there's no action in the scene. It's just dialogue back and forth. Silence of the Lambs. You have, I forget her name, the detective talking to Hannibal Lecter behind, he's in jail. He's behind bars, but their conversations are just so tense. And like his way of talking about it. And I as I think about this type of villain, there's one key that makes that true for all three of them. And it is that we do not see into the mind of the villain. We don't know what they know. We don't know what their intent is. We don't know what they're going to do. The element of the unknown, which is very frightening inherently in humans, right? We fear what we do not know.
Yep.
This is why when we see the monster at the end of the horror movie, it's never as scary as what we imagined it was, because we think the worst. When we get that rush of adrenaline and that the anxiety builds inside of us, we imagine the worst happening. And what is the worst is different depending on who we're looking at. Kaysen's worst case scenario is not the same as mine. So if we can get everyone in the room to imagine the worst case scenario, they're all going to be at tippy top height of their fear.
Yep.
But as soon as I show you what my worst case scenario is, as the director or the storyteller, everyone else is going to go, well, that wasn't my worst case scenario, so that's not as scary as what I was thinking it was going to be, right?
Yeah.
So in these types of villains, you want the audience to have no clue what they know, what they're going to do, what their intent is, what their plan is. All of that is unknown, so that you're sitting there going, you're sweating because you're thinking like, is he going to do this? Is he going to do this? And you're imagining all the ways that this could unravel in the worst possible way. And we never reveal that. Hannibal Lecter escaping, the result of it. But if we cannot know all the specifics behind how they went about it, or what the plan was, or what they knew, as much as you can keep that subtle or not revealed, the more menacing, intimidating, scary that villain will be, because we just think, oh, they're smarter than me. They're always going to be a step ahead. They know what I know. They're reading my mind. They know everything. What am I going to do? Right? It creates all this tension. And so those three examples, I think, are some of my favorites of that type. The scene in the rest stop with Shigur where he flips the coin. But again, see, what guides all these is they still have motivation. They still have even morals that guide them, right? It's not that those things don't exist, like we were talking about the other villains. It's just that they are more obscure. We just don't see them clearly. They're not totally revealed. But Shigur, as demented as the guy is, as quick to kill, murder, like do horrible things, he's still guided by this twisted sense of fate that he has. That like this quarter traveled 22 years to get to this moment, and it's going to decide whether or not you live or die. Call it heads or tails. And the guy's avoiding it. I don't know what I stand to win. Yeah. So like, you stand to win everything. Call it. And it's just like, oh my gosh, like what's going to happen? He flips the coin. He's like, all right, heads then. He flips it. There you go. Keep the quarter. You get to live. Right? Like Shigur he's guided by principle. He's not totally chaotic. He's not totally,
right.
What do you call it? Where there's like a society that has no laws.
Anarchy?
Yeah, it's not total anarchy with the character. He has a guiding set of principles.
Yeah.
They're just really twisted, and we don't know exactly what they are.
Right, because we don't know, and that's the that's the darkness. That's the not seeing the monster at the end of the film. That's because you don't actually get to see. It's funny because Shigur, like that haircut, the hair got, the way he dresses, just his typical nonchalant, just non-caring attitude, I guess, where he's just kind of there, and it's like you don't necessarily see this great evil person, but you kind of get glimpses as he's doing these things, but it's like it doesn't look to you like a monster, so you don't actually get to see the monster necessarily. You still get to picture in his mind like what's going on, I guess, and it's a lot scarier even in that sense. Same thing with Hans Landa. You've got this very well kept, like perfectly well dressed and very, very formal looking soldier, and it's like, what is he capable of? And you learn what he's capable of, but you don't see it necessarily immediately. And it's like, were he to actually look like this disheveled image that we would have of somebody who was going to do what that guy does, it wouldn't be as scary. But because he looks so proper, then all of a sudden it's like your eyes are clouded. You can't see the monster necessarily the way you thought you'd be able to.
Yeah. Another scene from No Country for Old Men, just to demonstrate this again, we have Woody Harrelson's character in the movie.
Yeah.
And he basically walks into his like hotel room and Sugar's there, and he sits down, and again there's just this drawn out long scene where you kind of know the inevitable, but you don't, because there have been other examples where he doesn't kill. Yeah. So like what's gonna make him kill and what's gonna make him not kill? We just don't exactly know, but pretty much you know, but you don't know when. You'd have no idea when it's going to happen. And it's dragged out and dragged out and dragged out. And when he finally shoots the gun, even though it's pointed at him the whole scene, even though you know the whole time it's coming, it still surprises you when it happens. And there's this element of the unknown within menacing characters that I think is very necessary for them to feel really intimidating, to create that sense of fear. Sourdough Mouse is saying Hannibal Lecter was great in Silence of the Lambs, just this incomprehensible evil. Before I move on to the next part of what he's going to say, I want to say, first of all, but Hannibal Lecter was not entirely evil. There were certain parts of his character, kind of like what you brought up with Breaking Bad, the high school chemistry teacher. I mean, he enjoyed culture. He enjoyed music. He was intelligent. He was very good as, I think he was a surgeon or something like that. And in some of the, I think, in Silence of the Lambs, but also some of the later films, he actually helps the investigation. He has all this potential for good because he's very intelligent. He can think like these people. And however, there's just that element to him that you don't understand. It's the part of him that you can't comprehend that makes him so scary, because that leads to this inevitability almost, that something's going to happen. You just don't know what. But the second part of what he says here, when they tried to make him more pitiable and understandable in Hannibal Rising, I think they lost something special in the character. And that I agree with. That's showing the monster to the audience rather than letting them imagine the worst, right? And this kind of leads back to our original point about the first type of villain. When you can categorize them over here, you can be really afraid because you don't know. It's the element of the unknown that makes them so scary. When you take them out of the box and you see them more close up and you understand them better, they're not as scary anymore because the unknown is eliminated, and you go, huh, I understand where you're coming from. They turned Hannibal Lecter from the scary villain, the vilified, evil, incomprehensible, and they made him comprehensible, and all of a sudden he didn't seem as scary anymore. See, this is the whole point. Do you want your villain to not be scary in the end? You want people to go and think about their own morals, or do you want them to just be freaking scared? That's kind of the choice that you have here as the storyteller. And neither one is a bad decision. It just depends on the goal, the end goal for the story, for the message, for the theme of the story, right?
Yeah.
Banana Slamma says that's why Ted Bundy surprised people. He was so normal and even attractive for one might believe a serial killer should look like. And when you listen to him talk, I mean, it can be really uncomfortable. And it's like, I don't know how. I mean, it's the twisted logic. There's a step in between. Dude has a legitimate problem that is pitiable, that is understandable and relatable. We've been there. We've felt the same feelings. It can be really painful. It can make you filled with rage. But taking it from I feel this way to I'm going to act in such a despicable way that the gap in logic that leads to that being a justifiable reaction to the problem is where the human psychology gets really complicated and really interesting. Well, I'll call it fascinating rather than interesting.
Sure.
It's not a good type of interesting in the sense. Anyways, you guys know what I mean. But those types of villains are most menacing when we don't really understand what they know or what they think or what they're going to do. The unknown of it. And as soon as you get to know them, they become a little bit more relatable and harder to swallow, I guess. So,
yeah.
There we go. Anything else that you want to add to that, or?
Not necessarily. I think that I think we did that pretty good, actually.
Anybody in the comments have any other questions related to this you want to hit us up with before we move on? Go ahead and do that. We have just one community story today, and it's not anybody's work from the community. No one sent me anything for that, but just a question from Patreon. So We'll cover that last. But if anybody has anything else they want to add, let us know. Lego Dog commented, "One of my favorite thought experiments for myself is to enter the shoes of the final boss of Xenoblade Chronicles. It's really interesting, actually, seeing the perspective of someone from that type of power, and it kind of makes you understand why he does the things he does." Alex Mamedes? Mamedes? Delita is a very complex villain, too. We never know what he is up to until the church scene. Delita and Ramza are a really great example of characters that are created from the opposing thematic sort of like morality, right? Delita's essentially willing to do whatever it takes to reach the ends. Ends justify the means, where Ramza's never going to compromise his honor, his sense of morality, and will find another way to accomplish his goals, right? So those two heroes / anti-hero in one sense fit really well into that, and that's why that story is so good for me. Metal Gear, the Metal Gear games have a lot of this too. Metal Gear 2 and 3 both come to mind, as Riker's Beard is alluding to.
Yeah.
So, okay. Let's move into our last question. This one comes from Christopher Kowalchuk on Patreon. Now, Kaysen, you did say that you might know this person.
I don't remember the last name of a roommate I had in college, but it might be Christopher Kowalchuk. I'm just saying. Anyways, it was a last name that sounded very similar to that. Let me know, Christopher, if I know you. Anyways.
Okay. Here's the question. What's your typical work schedule like in regard to the podcast / channel? I'm curious to know how you balance this creative endeavor with the other aspects of your life.
It's not easy. It's not easy. Well,
you have more, I think, like obligations, responsibilities than I have. So
yeah, I do. And I don't know. That's a good. It's a good question. How do I do it? Not maybe as well as I could do it, but having just certain days that I know this day I'm doing this thing. Basically, every evening of my week is filled with something, whether it's recreational, whether I'm gonna go, visit family, or whether my wife and I are gonna go out for the night, or something like that. I basically every single day. So Sundays is I'm doing my podcast. Tuesdays we do the book club. The only times that I have available for working on this kind of thing, other than the podcast and book club that we do, would be either Monday evening or Wednesday evening. And so I kind of just have to make sure that I have those times available, I guess.
Yeah.
But making sure that you have a structured schedule, because if you just think, hey, I'll do it whenever I feel like it, you'll kind of never really end up doing it, because especially for some of the videos we put on our main channel, on the YouTube channel, some of them are big and they're complicated and they take a lot of time and they take a big, long script. And sometimes it's easy to just avoid it and be like, yeah, I'll do that later, right? Because it's just such a big thing.
Yeah.
It's hard to know how to tackle. But when you've got your time slots set out and it's like 2 hours this day, 2 hours this day, then it's like, okay, you sit down and it's like, well, I'll do what I can right now, instead of thinking that I could ever have time to finish the whole thing all at once.
Yeah. For those of you who know the Myers-Briggs personality types, the 4 letters, ISTP, ENFJ.
Yeah.
Look into that if you haven't. It's actually really interesting to take the tests and like learn more about yourself. Yeah. But the letters correspond in such a way. You have I and E, which is introvert, extrovert. You have sensing and intuitive. So whether you're a sensing type or an intuitive type. Thinking and feeling are the third. And then the last is judging, and I think it's perceiving or something like that.
Judging and perceiving, yeah.
So you have those kind of like 4 elements to the way that you think, your method for reaching your conclusions, how you sort of arrive at decision making, that sort of thing. Lego Dog says I'm INFJ. So I am ISTP. And so what that means for me, obviously being introverted, being sensing type, being a thinking type, but the last letter has a lot to do with the way that you structure your life. Whether you are a go with the flow type of person, or whether you really need to like regiment your life in order to function. I need a plan. I need to know what I'm doing and when I'm doing it, at what time I'm doing it. I need to like have meal plans. I need to like keep a calendar. I need to like schedule. I am not a J. I really wish I was more that way. It would make my life a lot easier if it was. I feel like I would be a million times more effective if I was a J. I aspire to be more like a J, but I just am not that way. I am a P. Now, what's nice about being P is that you can more easily go off script and you feel more comfortable with problem solving on the spot. A lot of J types, they really struggle if something goes off schedule. We're supposed to be doing this right now, and they freak out.
Yeah.
And it's like, I can't handle it. What are we going to do now? And a P type is like, hey man, everything's cool. We'll just do this. So that element of my personality, I'm glad that I have that. Especially in like filmmaking, a lot of things would go wrong. I mean, everything almost never went according to the schedule.
I know our sets were a mess sometimes.
People would not show up, or we wouldn't have the costumes done on time, or this would go wrong, or that would go wrong. And that is literally like the rule of thumb in filmmaking. Everyone knows, who's done it for any amount of time, that you could have the greatest plan ever. And it is good to plan. It's good to have storyboards. Right. It's good to have a plan in place, but it's not going to go that way. The weather's going to be bad. You're going to have rain when you should have sunshine. It's going to ruin your shot. You're going to have to come back on a different day. It's going to throw everything out of whack. You're going to have to figure out how you're going to pay your people on time. And so being able to take things as they come and go off script and, get things done in a way to where you feel comfortable when things are not going according to plan is a really nice skill to have. Here's where it really sucks, though, is in personal time management. Because with a project like my retrospectives, they are enormous projects. I can't tell you. I mean, the average retrospective I make is a 200 to sometimes 300 to 400 hour process. It is a lot of time and energy that goes into making those videos. It is intense research. Well, depends on the game. Some games have more stuff to look into. They have more interviews. Final Fantasy games have a lot more attention put on them, so there's way more interviews to go through and way more information on them than, say, I don't know, something like Terranigma, which was very small, right? So It varies, but the point still stands that there's a lot of reading, a lot of research, a lot of effort put into the writing of it, and tons of time put into the editing. My recording process is long. My editing process on the audio recordings is long. And so what Kaysen is getting at is that you look at the totality of the work required for that, and you go, oh, that sucks. I'm not going to get started on that today.
I know. It's like, it's so big. You could always just do it tomorrow and you wouldn't be that far off schedule.
Yep, because you're going to make such chips in the progress of it. It's just a little bit at a time, right?
Yeah.
So, yes, you really do need to set a schedule for yourself and be committed to that schedule and really say, I am dedicating this time to this and stick to it. Otherwise, you will not find that balance. I have been feeling lately like my life balance is really atrociously bad. Because one, I haven't really. I try to be more of a go with the flow type of person. I try to live my life that way, but it makes it so that I don't start things when I should, and I get behind on them, and then I feel pressured, like, okay, this thing's got to take precedence now, and I put all my attention into that thing, and then other things fall off the wagon. So that when I complete that thing, it's okay, that thing's done. And instead of starting on the next phase of that project, let's call it videos for the channel, I then put my entire focus onto what I've been getting behind on at work that week, and I completely focus on that, and I say, okay, that's done, awesome, that feels good. Now I'm behind on this thing. Crap! Now I gotta like switch over here, and I'm just like constantly like behind, even though I'm more or less always getting things done. But I could get all of them done much more efficiently and consistently if I would just stick to a schedule. So scheduling, being more of a J type, is really, really important for that reason. But I think you also, and I don't know Christopher in particular, don't know his personality, but I can speak, Kaysen might.
I might know his personality.
Just sticking to kind of, I can only really count for myself. What I tend to do when I feel like a certain thing isn't going quite the way that I want, when I feel like this isn't being as successful as I'd like it to be, my typical reaction is to, let's take up 3, 4, 5 more projects related to that thing and just do more. That is generally what my mind goes to. Well, let's just work harder and more and do more things, and then that thing will succeed. And that's not always the right answer. Right. A lot of times you need to scale back and focus more and be more consistent with the one thing that you can do a little better. And so, I find myself in a place where I'm creating videos for the channel. I'm doing a book club for the channel weekly. I'm doing a podcast for the channel weekly. I'm doing streams for the channel weekly. It's just, you get like a handful of things that are all related to Resonant Arc. And then at work, I have a similar pile. And then in personal life relationships, you have a similar pile. And personal aspirations and goals, like the novel I'm writing, you have a similar pile. All these things start piling up, and you just lose your mind. And you're like, I can't take it. And you just like turn your brain off, and you start ignoring stuff, and then you feel bad about that. And so, anyways, this is why my personality type's terrible at this. But one thing I would recommend, and something I'm actually heavily considering, is just really cutting back, trying not to do quite so much, and just really focus on 1 or 2 things, maybe 3 at most, that you really want in life, and saying, I have this time set aside for this and this time set aside for this, and I'm going to do that. And I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to get freaked out because it's not going quite as well as I wanted. I need to do more or whatever. Just stick to it. Stick to it. See it through. Make small adjustments along the way that are smart. Obviously, like, look at the data, look at what's working and what's not, and make small adjustments, but don't try to take on don't bite off more than you can chew. That'll just make it worse. So my answer to your question is, I don't balance things very well, so I can't give you the best advice on that other than what I think would work. I'm going to try it and see. I'll report back. But my typical work schedule is I work most of the day at my full-time job, and then in the evenings, for the most part, I'm working on stuff for the channel. And so I kind of go back and forth between personal relationships and focusing more on those, and then focusing more on the channel stuff. So some weeks it'll be like I'm just hammering away. I'm like all in on making video for the channel. And then one week it's like, oh, he disappeared. What happened to that guy? He's supposed to be doing streams and working on this next video. What happened?
Right.
So I'm going to get more consistent on that, and I'll report back to you, Christopher. So, all right. Banana Slammer says, how's the novel progressing? It's progressing quite well. It's one of those things where the end is so near and yet so far away, right? Because I've been working on this thing forever, and as an artist, it's never done to you. Like, you always see something wrong with it, and you always see something you can fix. But in terms of like how far is it to being complete, like a total, like the book actually being done, I'm like 85-90% of the way there. So it's really close. I just need to finish it and not continually edit pre-existing chapters over and over and over. Yeah. So anyways, that's it for this week. Thanks, everybody. You guys are beasts. Thanks for following and supporting the channel. My Terranigma video is going to be ready next week. It should be uploaded on probably later in the week, maybe Thursday, something like that. But basically, it's just a matter of finding the right video clips and putting them in place. That's kind of the point of it. Everything else is done. It's just grabbing the video clip, putting it in place. Grabbing the video clip, putting it in place. Finding the right one, putting it in the right place. It's about 25 minutes long, and I have, I think, about 5 minutes of it completely done in terms of the video side of it. So 2-3 more days and it should be done.
All right.
So look forward to that. Till then, guys, have a great rest of your weekend. And we'll see you again next week. Peace out. Thank you.